Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is David. A few months ago, I received an unexpected invitation. I was invited to my ex's wedding. It sounds like the setup for a disaster, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I should go when the invitation arrived. But I decided to show up, not expecting what would come next. But here's how everything began. My ex, Sarah, and I started with a friendship that lasted 8 years before any of us ever thought about dating each other. We met in college through mutual friends and just clicked immediately, not romantically, but as friends who could talk for hours about everything and nothing. I was studying computer science, planning to become a software engineer, while Sarah was majoring in communications with dreams of working in nonprofit marketing. During those 8 years of friendship, we both dated other people seriously. I had a girlfriend I dated for almost 3 years. She was ambitious, driven, and we had this intense relationship that everyone thought would lead to marriage. Sarah, on the other hand, was with a guy I knew as Michael for about 2.5 years. He was this laid-back musician type who balanced out her high-energy personality perfectly. We'd all hang out together as couples sometimes. It was comfortable and easy. Sarah and I would joke that we were like siblings, completely platonic, but incredibly close. Both our relationships ended. Mine ended first. My girlfriend then was ready to settle down, get married, start planning a family, and I just wasn't there yet, so she went on to cheat on me with another guy. I was focused on establishing my career, maybe traveling a bit, enjoying my 20s without the pressure of major life commitments. Sarah and her guy split months later because he got this amazing job offer with a record label in Nashville, and neither of them wanted to do the long-distance thing. So there we were, both suddenly single after years of serious relationships, both dealing with that weird emptiness that comes after a long relationship ends. We started spending more time together, just the two of us. Coffee dates on Saturday mornings, movie nights on weeknights, when we can't sleep, long walks around the city, when we can. We'd always been close, but there was something different about those months after our breakups. We were more open with each other, more vulnerable than we'd ever been. We'd talk about what had gone wrong in our relationships, what we'd learned about ourselves, and what we wanted to do differently next time. We became each other's emotional support system. I can't pinpoint exactly when our friendship shifted to something more romantic. It was gradual, like slowly becoming aware that the person you've been looking for has been sitting across from you at coffee shops for years. One evening in November, we were at her apartment watching some terrible romantic comedy that we were making fun of the entire time. She fell asleep with her head on my shoulder during the movie, and I sat there for 2 hours, not wanting to move, realizing that this felt more right than anything had in a long time. Something about that moment made me understand that what I was feeling wasn't just friendship anymore. We talked about it the next morning over breakfast. She admitted to having feelings for me too, but both of us were nervous about crossing from friendship to romance. We'd seen other friends try it and fail spectacularly, watched good friendships get completely ruined by unsuccessful attempts at dating. The stakes felt incredibly high because we valued our friendships so much, but we also couldn't ignore what was happening between us. The chemistry had always been there underneath the surface. We just never acknowledged it while we were with other people. We decided to give it a try, cautiously, with the understanding that preserving our friendship was more important than pursuing romance. The transition from friends to dating was surprisingly smooth. We already knew each other's habits, preferences, and pet peeves. We'd seen each other at our absolute worst, stressed about work, dealing with family drama, recovering from terrible hangovers, crying over breakups. There was no trying to impress each other. We just picked up where we'd left off as friends and added romance to the mix. Those 8 months of dating were some of the happiest of my life. Everything felt easy and natural. We moved in together after about 4 months, which felt like the most natural thing in the world since we'd been practically spent time together as friends anyway. We had our routines, our shared interests, our comfortable silences that never felt awkward. I proposed to Sarah after 8 months of dating. Looking back, that seems incredibly fast, but it didn't feel rushed at the time. We'd known each other for years, been through ups and downs together as friends, and seen each other in every possible situation. Getting married felt like the natural next step in a relationship that had been building for much longer than just those 8 months of dating. The wedding was small and perfect. Both our families had been waiting for us to figure out what everyone else had apparently seen for years, that we belonged together. Our college friends joked that they'd been taking bets on when we'd finally start dating. Everything about the wedding felt right and easy, like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. The first year of marriage was really good. We settled into domestic life without much trouble. We'd already spent so much time together that living as a married couple wasn't a big adjustment. We rented a bigger house in a neighborhood we both loved, adopted a golden retriever named Charlie, and started talking seriously about having kids in a few years. But somewhere in the second year, things gradually changed. The easy conversation we'd always had started feeling more forced. We'd sit at dinner and struggle to find things to talk about that weren't work schedules or household logistics. The comfortable silences became uncomfortable silences. We were still friends, but we were starting to feel more like roommates than romantic partners. I think part of the problem was that we'd skipped some crucial steps in the relationship development process. We'd gone from friendship to marriage without spending enough time in that phase where you're building romantic intimacy, learning to be lovers instead of just best friends who happen to live together. By the third year, we were having the same conversations over and over again. Sarah felt like we'd lost the romance that had brought us together in the first place. I felt like we were trying too hard to recreate something that had happened naturally and couldn't be forced. We went to couples counseling for a few months, which helped us communicate better, but didn't solve the fundamental problem. The decision to divorce was our next option. We sat in our living room one evening in March and admitted what we'd both been thinking for months. We were better as friends than as spouses. We tried to rush into marriage based on a great friendship without giving the romantic relationship enough time to develop properly. We handled the divorce ourselves, without lawyers or bitter court battles. We split everything fairly. I kept most of the furniture because I was staying in the same city. We divided our shared possessions like mature adults who genuinely cared about each other's well-being. Sarah moved to another state about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She'd gotten a job offer that was too good to pass up. It was also probably healthy for both of us to have some physical distance while we figured out how to navigate our post-marriage relationship. I stayed in our hometown, focused on advancing my career in software development, and eventually started dating again. We kept in touch through occasional texts and emails, phone calls on birthdays or holidays. There was no bitterness between us, just a kind of sadness about a relationship that could have worked if we'd approached it differently. 3 years later, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Sarah was marrying someone, and the ceremony would be in Portland. I was surprised to be invited, but Sarah had included a handwritten note saying she'd really like me to be there if I was comfortable with it. She mentioned that James knew all about our history and was completely fine with her maintaining a friendship with me. I thought about it for weeks. Part of me felt like attending my ex-wife's wedding was asking for emotional complications I didn't need in my life. But another part of me was genuinely happy for her and curious about this new chapter in her life. We'd been such a significant part of each other's lives for so many years that missing this milestone felt wrong. I decided to go. I took a long weekend, flew to Portland, and checked into a hotel near the wedding venue. The ceremony was beautiful, held outdoors in a garden setting, small and intimate, with few guests. Sarah looked radiant in a way I remembered from our early dating days, but hadn't seen much during the later years of our marriage. Her new man seemed like a genuinely good guy. He was quieter than Sarah, more thoughtful and reserved, but you could see how devoted he was to her. They'd been dating for almost 2 years and engaged for 1, which felt like a much more reasonable timeline than ours had been. The reception was at a small restaurant downtown that the couple had rented out for the evening. I knew maybe half the guests from our college days, some of Sarah's family members, and a few coworkers from her previous job. I spent most of the evening having pleasant conversations with people I hadn't seen in years, catching up on life changes and career updates. About an hour into the reception, I was standing near the bar when I overheard a conversation between three guys I'd known in college. They had been part of our larger friend group, though we'd never been particularly close. They were clearly several drinks into the evening and talking louder than they probably realized. One was saying something about how Sarah had finally found someone who could make marriage work and how some people just aren't cut out for that kind of commitment. The other guy chimed in with a comment about how I'd probably dodged a bullet anyway because Sarah was difficult to live with. The last guy, who'd always been the most tactless of the three, made some remark about how I must have really screwed things up to lose someone like Sarah. I felt my face get hot, but I tried to ignore them. These were guys I'd barely talked to since college, and their opinions shouldn't have mattered to me. But their voices were carrying across the room, and other people were starting to notice the conversation. I saw a few heads turn in my direction, and I realized that my presence at the wedding was becoming a topic of discussion among the guests. I was debating whether to leave quietly or say something when Sarah appeared beside me. Someone who overheard at least part of what these guys had been saying probably told her, and her expression was not happy at all. She excused herself from the conversation she'd been having with some relatives and walked directly over to where the three guys were standing. She interrupted their conversation and told them she couldn't help but overhear their discussion about her first marriage. The first guy looked embarrassed and tried to backtrack, saying they were just making casual conversation and didn't mean anything by it. Sarah held up her hand to stop him and said she wanted to be very clear about something. Her voice was carrying across the room by now. Most of the reception had gone quiet, and people were turning to listen to what was happening. She started by talking about her new man, saying he was an amazing man and she was incredibly lucky to be marrying him. But then she said she needed everyone there to understand something about me. She called me one of the finest men she'd ever known and said that our marriage didn't work out, but that wasn't because either of us had failed as people. We'd rushed into something we weren't ready for and learned some hard lessons about the difference between loving someone as a friend and building a romantic partnership with them. The room was completely silent at this point. I felt like every eye in the place was on me, but Sarah wasn't finished speaking. She talked about how I'd been patient with her through some of the most difficult periods of her life, how I'd supported her career ambitions, encouraged her dreams, and helped her become the woman she is today. She said the fact that our marriage ended didn't diminish any of that. She looked directly at the guys and told them she'd appreciate it if they could stop treating divorce like it was a personal failing and start recognizing that sometimes good people make decisions that don't work out, and that's perfectly okay. The silence stretched for what felt like several minutes, but was probably only about 30 seconds. Then her husband stepped up beside Sarah, put his arm around her waist, and took her away. And gradually the conversations resumed, but with a completely different energy than before. I stayed for another hour, making small talk and trying to act normal, but I was emotionally drained and ready to leave. The evening had been intense in ways I hadn't expected when I decided to attend. As I was getting ready to go, Sarah found me near the coat check area. She thanked me for coming and said it meant more than I probably realized. I told her I was genuinely happy for her, that her new man seemed like a great guy, and that I hoped they'd have the kind of marriage we'd never quite figured out how to build. We hugged goodbye, and I left the reception. The next morning, I was in my hotel room packing up to head to the airport when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. She asked if I had time to grab coffee before my flight, and said she wanted to talk about what had happened at the reception. I'll be honest, part of me wanted to just leave Portland and process everything that had happened on my own time. The previous night had been emotionally intense, and I wasn't sure I was ready for more heavy conversations. But curiosity got the better of me, and I texted her back that I could meet for an hour before heading to the airport. We met at this little coffee shop downtown, just a place where we could sit and talk. Sarah showed up looking more like the person I'd known for all those years rather than the bride from the night before. She apologized immediately for putting me in an uncomfortable position with her speech. She said she'd seen the look on my face yesterday, and she just couldn't let it slide. She'd spent months planning this wedding, thinking about how to navigate having me there, but she'd never anticipated having to deal with people making cruel comments about our marriage. I told her she didn't need to apologize, that what she'd done was incredibly kind and more than I deserved. But she shook her head and said that wasn't the point. She said she'd been thinking about it all night, and she realized she'd partly made that speech for herself as much as for me. Sarah explained that she'd been carrying around some guilt about our marriage for years. Not guilt about getting divorced, but guilt about how quickly we'd rushed into things, about whether she'd pushed for marriage because she was afraid of losing our friendship, about whether she'd failed to communicate what she needed from a romantic relationship. Hearing those guys reduce our entire 3-year marriage to some kind of personal failing on my part had triggered something in her. She said she realized that she'd never properly processed the end of our marriage because we'd both been so focused on being mature and amicable about everything. We'd never actually talked through what had gone wrong or acknowledged the good things that had come out of our time together. This conversation over coffee lasted almost 3 hours. We talked about things we'd never discussed during our marriage or even during our divorce. Sarah told me about moments when she'd felt like we were more like business partners than lovers, but she'd been afraid to bring it up because she didn't want to hurt my feelings or make me think she didn't appreciate everything I did for her. I admitted that I'd sometimes felt like I was performing the role of a husband rather than actually being one. I loved her deeply, but I'd never learned how to be romantic with someone who knew me so completely. The mystery and excitement that I'd felt with other girlfriends wasn't there with Sarah, and I'd mistakenly thought that meant we were more mature and stable, when really it meant we were missing a crucial element. Sarah said something that really stuck with me. She said that when we decided to get married, we'd loved each other as friends and assumed that was enough to build a lifetime partnership on. I asked her if she regretted marrying me, and she thought about it for a long time before answering. She said she regretted that we'd hurt each other by trying to force something that wasn't quite right, but she didn't regret the experience itself. She said those 3 years had taught her things about herself that she'd needed to learn, and she genuinely believed I was a better partner for my future relationships because of what we'd gone through together. As we were getting ready to leave, Sarah said that maybe the real success of our relationship wasn't that we'd stayed married, but that we'd managed to love each other well enough to let each other go when we needed to. She said not every love story has to end with a couple riding off into the sunset together, that sometimes love means helping someone become the person they need to be, even if it's not with you. Before we left the coffee shop, Sarah asked me about my dating life, whether I'd learned anything from our marriage that was helping me in new relationships. I told her about a woman I'd been seeing for a few months, how I was being more intentional about taking things slowly and making sure romantic chemistry developed naturally alongside friendship. Sarah smiled and said that was exactly what she'd hoped for me. She said she sometimes worried that our marriage had damaged my ability to trust romantic relationships, and hearing that I was dating again with more wisdom gave her peace about everything that had happened between us. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, and this time it felt final in a way that our divorce had never quite achieved. Not bitter or sad, but complete. Like we'd finally said everything that needed to be said and could move forward without any unfinished emotional business between us. I'm 35 now. I've dated several people since the divorce, but I've been more careful about taking things slowly, making sure that romantic feelings develop naturally instead of trying to force them. I learned from my experience with Sarah that friendship and romantic love are different things, and having one doesn't automatically give you the other. Looking back on that evening, I think what struck me most was Sarah's courage in that moment. She could have easily ignored the conversation, let people think whatever they wanted to think, and focused on celebrating her new marriage. Instead, she chose to speak up for someone who wasn't even technically part of her life anymore, because it was the right thing to do. It takes a special kind of person to publicly defend their ex-spouse at their own wedding reception. It takes someone who understands that protecting the dignity of people you've loved is more important than avoiding awkward conversations or uncomfortable moments. Now, I know every situation is different, and sometimes the healthiest thing is a clean break with no contact. But I do think there's value in trying to end things with as much grace as possible, in recognizing that the person you're separating from probably isn't a villain, even if you couldn't make it work together. The human heart is complicated, and relationships are messy and difficult and don't always fit into neat categories. But sometimes, if you're lucky and you choose wisely, and you treat people with the respect they deserve, you can find moments of grace even in the middle of complicated situations. That wedding reception was one of those moments for me.